the harder you try to make people take your words seriously. The easier you may be teaching them not to. You say, if you do that again, I'm leaving. They do it again. You say, I'm done. Then 2 days later, you are having the same conversation with the same person. You say, this is the last time. And somewhere in the back of their mind, they are already wondering, is it? Most people immediately blame themselves. Maybe I'm weak. But maybe that is the wrong explanation. Maybe you did not break your word because you were weak. Maybe you made a promise before you understood what keeping it would cost. The relationship, the friendship, the comfort, the approval, the familiar life built around the very thing you said you would no longer accept. And this is where the trap begins. You make a dramatic statement while the emotion is intense. For a moment, it feels powerful. The argument stops. The other person goes quiet. You finally feel like you have taken your power back. That is the temporary relief. Then the emotion fades. But the consequence remains. Suddenly, the promise that felt powerful 5 minutes ago feels much harder to keep. So you take it back. Not necessarily because you never meant it. Because meaning it now comes with a price. People do not always consciously decide to test you. They simply remember. They remember what happened the last time you said, I'm done. They remember whether your warning actually changed anything. And eventually, they stop listening only to your words. They start waiting to see what happens next. Because if this is the last time, is never actually the last time. People stop hearing a boundary. They hear a delay. And the most important part of this process often happens immediately after you say no. You finally say it. No. Simple. Clear. Then the other person reacts. Maybe they look disappointed. Maybe they go quiet. Maybe they say, seriously? Well, after everything I've done for you. And suddenly, something changes inside you. A moment ago, you knew exactly what you wanted. Now you are questioning yourself. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe this really isn't that big of a deal. Maybe I should just let it go. They did not necessarily prove you wrong. They just made the moment uncomfortable enough for you to start wondering if you were. And once you begin doubting your own decision, backing down starts to feel reasonable. So you soften. That's not what I meant. I mean, maybe I can do it later. It's just because I've had a lot going on. A decision that was clear a moment ago suddenly becomes a discussion. Not because your position changed. Because their reaction made you question whether you were allowed to have that position in the first place. This is why people-pleasing is not always about wanting everyone to like you. Sometimes, you simply cannot tolerate being the person who made someone unhappy. So you sacrifice your decision, just to make the uncomfortable moment disappear. You do not change your mind because they proved you wrong. You change it because you do not trust yourself enough to sit with their disappointment. And that creates a pattern. You say no. They react. You feel uncomfortable. You question yourself. You soften. They remember. The next time, they may not even need to argue. They already know that once the moment becomes uncomfortable enough, you may reconsider. But after this happens enough times, something even more important begins. People stop reacting to your words. They start predicting you. Think about someone who constantly says, I'll be there, but isn't. I'll change, but never does. At first, people react. Then they get disappointed. Eventually, they adjust. They stop relying on the promise. They simply expect the pattern. The same thing happens with your boundaries. You say, don't speak to me like that. It happens again. You say, I'm done. You return. Eventually, your words stop predicting your actions. And once that happens, people stop hearing your words as a signal that something is about to change. They start hearing them as part of the same familiar cycle. You get angry, you make a strong statement. The moment passes. Nothing really changes. This is why one huge confrontation rarely fixes the problem. You can finally explode. Say everything. Make the strongest statement you have ever made. But if the same pattern returns afterwards, the explosion becomes part of the pattern too. Anger, warning, apology, repeat. The problem is not that your words are too quiet. It is that people have learned what usually happens after you say them. And people trust patterns more than promises. A person who says very little but consistently follows through can carry more weight than someone making dramatic declarations every week. Because seriousness is not about intensity. It is about whether ignoring your words changes anything. But why do people make these dramatic promises in the first place? Why say something permanent when you may only feel it temporarily? The answer is what happens inside you during the emotional moment. You are hurt. So you say, I never want to. You are hurt. So you say, I never want to see you again. You are angry. So you say, this is your last chance. You feel betrayed. So you say, I'm completely done. Person returns. And suddenly, you are left with a promise your calmer self never truly agreed to keep. So you take it back. Not because the original feeling was fake. Because a temporary emotion made a permanent commitment. And those are not the same thing. This is why you need to be careful with words like never, always, done, last chance. Sometimes they are not decisions. They are feelings wearing the language of decisions. Instead of, I'm never speaking to you again. Maybe the truth is, I need some space. Instead of, do that again and I'm gone. Maybe the truth is, if this keeps happening, I will stop being part of this. The second version may sound less powerful, but it is more credible. Because it is real. And real boundaries do not need dramatic language. They need someone willing to accept the consequence. That is the part most people avoid. They want the power of a boundary, without the pain of enforcing it. And every time you make a commitment you never intended to keep, the damage goes deeper than other people's opinion of you. Eventually, you start expecting yourself not to follow through. And that is where self-trust begins to disappear. You do not rebuild credibility by announcing that people need to respect you. You rebuild it quietly. You stop making commitments just to end an emotional moment. You stop promising permanent actions based on temporary feelings. You start saying what you actually mean. And you start making commitments you are genuinely prepared to keep. Then slowly something changes. You keep one small promise to yourself. Then another. You say you will do something. And you do it. You say you will stop tolerating something. And you stop. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. But consistently. And with every promise you keep, something returns. Self-trust. Because the deepest consequence of constantly breaking your own word is not that other people stop believing you. It is that you start expecting yourself to fail. You say, tomorrow, and part of you already expects another excuse. You say, this time, and part of you is already waiting for the pattern to repeat. That is the real damage. So rebuild it the same way you lost it. One honest commitment at a time. Eventually, people notice. Not because you demanded respect. Because your words start matching your actions again. And that is the shift. You do not need to sound more serious. You need to become someone whose words are accurate. Because people do not learn your boundaries from what you threaten. They learn them from what you actually do. A feeling can explain what you feel. A commitment tells people what you will do. When you stop confusing the two, your words stop being negotiable. And before anyone else learns to believe you, you have to become someone you believe.